So we are a small company in Research Triangle Park, that's in North Carolina, who specializes in obtaining and managing grant funding to support the research and development for groundbreaking technologies. So right now we have around 16 PhD level grant writing experts or scientific consultants. A lot of us have served SBIR STTR review panels or other type of review panels. We try to develop relationships with program officers in different funding agencies. And some of them have direct entrepreneurial experiences, so they have funded their own startup companies in the past. We also have a whole part of the company who specialize in grant compliance, because once you have received an award, you need a grant compliance system, basically, so you don't go to jail. And we have over 150 years of combined experience in grant writing, accounting, and compliance. Over the almost 5 years that we have been in existence, we've had almost 500 clients in almost 46 states and in 7 countries. So sometimes we do have clients, international clients, that are interested in either spinning out companies in the US or that they have subsidiaries in the US that are interested in looking for grant funding here. And our clients have secured over $250 million in grant funding. And this year, we've been ranked #1 fast-growing woman-led company in North Carolina. So quickly, a little bit about me. I'm a scientific consultant there. I got my PhD in biology from the University of Rochester in upstate New York, where it is a little bit colder than here, basically the tundra. I did my postdoc at New York University in the Department of Genomics and Systems Biology in molecular genetics. Ever since I started working in Eva Garland, I happen to kind of specialize in medical devices, although I have had companies in a very wide variety of technologies, from software to hemp to engineering. So we are kind of, even though a lot of our companies do biomedical sciences, we have clients sort of all over areas of expertise. I have written and helped clients with grant proposals and secure SBIR STTR.
I'm Erin. So the clients that I help tend to come more from cancer biology, therapeutic development, that kind of thing. I've done some work with medical devices in the cardiovascular area. And then similarly to Vicki, with Eva, I've written grants. I spend most of my time within the NIH system, but I've also written grants for the National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, and then also NIMBLE, which is sort of a biomanufacturing grant mechanism.
Okay, so we introduced ourselves, but now we really want to know who you are and why you're here. So I'm going to first ask for volunteers to tell us who you are. Are you from transfer offices? Are you faculty, postdocs, entrepreneurs? Do you have business experience? Have you submitted SBIR STTR before? And then the second question is, what are you hoping to learn in this work? Sort of because understanding the grant landscape. So the first thing is, a lot of you may know this, but people who haven't yet attempted to write grants may ask themselves, grants, right? So in the past, this is how people that were interested in developing a product sort of approach the timeline of how that product was going to be brought to market. So they would start with some seed money, maybe from the founder savings or some friends and family pitching in some money. Then maybe they would get some money from angels funding. And then, basically they would reach out to venture capital funding. So in the past, that used to work fine. However, this is the problem that we're facing right now. There is a big gap sort of in the early growth stages of the company, where you may get some of this money, but then venture capital, really wants to see a product that is far more developed. than it used to be in the past. So you really need money at this stage to really focus on sort of the critical time when your product needs to be developed. And this is where grants really can help you develop that product.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So how do incubators fit into this landscape?
So incubators have, I think, different advantages. And there are different types of incubators, right? So incubators are often a place where, that will help you build a company from scratch. They will provide you with a space where you can meet other potential entrepreneurs. They will help you form a company and everything that's associated with forming a company. They will give you the support to do that. Incubators wouldn't usually give you the money to do that, but they will give you the space and they will give you resources that will help you navigate everything that's around forming a company and everything that comes with it. Making connections and introducing you to people and helping you navigate and introducing you to the resources to build that company. And usually they will take you to the stage of saying, okay, now you're ready to apply for an STTR. And that's how usually where they would stop. I'm generalizing here because it really depends on the incubator, because that's a little bit of a general term. So of course, grants or non-dilutive funding, may have advantages and disadvantages. So what are the advantages? It's free money in the sense that, it won't take equity from you. Grants fund high risk and high reward research. It can supplement other funding sources, as we have seen, and it can provide leverage. So we sometimes companies that want to apply for grants, not necessarily because they need that money, right? Because, phase ones sometimes are like, $2,000, $2,500. And, they already have maybe some initial funding from an investor. But the reason they want to apply for, an NIH phase one or an NSF phase one, because that gives them leverage to then go out and ask for more money from investors. Because it looks really good if they say, listen, the NIH or the NSF has funded this. Because investors may really look at that company favorably if they can show that they have obtained federal funding. And also, a very important thing that some people do not appreciate until they get it is you can get free feedback via the review process, right? Because sometimes, you have a product that you're not sure if it works or not, or you think you have a very good plan on how to go about, developing that product. But then until you put it in writing and you submit that proposal and, you don't get the reviews from the reviewers that are able to point out maybe all the gaps in your plan or your thought process, you don't realize, oh, I should have thought about that. There are some disadvantages, though, that you need to keep in mind. Not always, but there might be a long waiting time between the proposal submission and the award. That's just how it is. Which is not different from academic grants. Most of you come from an academic background, so you are not surprised. But, sometimes when we give these workshops or seminars, there are a lot of business people or entrepreneurs who do not come from an academic background, and when they are informed how long they have to wait for an award, they're like, they are highly competitive. The pay lines sometimes are less than 10%. It really varies among agencies, among institutes, but it can be very low, okay? Some NIH institutes are higher than that, which is great. Some agencies are really low, okay? Like the Department of Education, that's like 5%. I don't think any of you is in the education field right now, but I'm just making an example that I know. And the use of funds is highly restricted, right? I mean, you're proposing something, and the money that you get from the grant needs to go to exactly the things you said you were going to do in the grant. It's not money that you can use for your company as a whole.
Are these paylines publicly available?
Some of them are, some of them are not, okay? So NIH, in general, it's pretty open and it's pretty clear. So they will post their paylines in their website for their institute. And most of you here are people who deal or are intending to apply for NIH. NSF in general for SBIRs, STTRs, the success rate is around 13–14%. And they do say that at the end of the year. Now, other federal agencies are more obscure, okay? DOD is maybe the most obscure of them all, the Department of Defense, not surprisingly. Other SBIR sponsoring agencies, they vary. Department of Education, which is one that I often help people with, they do say, you know, this is how much money we have, and at the end of the year, they would say, this is how many applications we got, this is how many we're gonna fund. So you do have an idea of the success rate. But it really depends a lot on the agency. Yes?
If you get a successful phase 1, do you still get feedback with that? Or
Yes. You will get the same summary statement, and you will get the feedback from reviewers. Okay, so what are the goals of this SBIR STTR program? So the overall goal is to meet the federal research and development needs, increase private sector commercialization of innovation derived from federal research, stimulate innovation, and foster and encourage participation in innovation entrepreneurship by socially and economically disadvantaged persons. This is how it was devised like more than 20 years ago. So what are the agencies that participate in SBIR STTR? These are the agencies. So some of the agencies support both SBIRs and STTRs, and those are the ones on the top: the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, the National Science Foundation, NASA, and the Department of Human Health, which is basically NIH. And there are agencies that only support SBIRs. And that is the Department of Transportation, that's the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the USDA, which is the Department of Agriculture, NOAA, which is the Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration thingy. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Both of these two things sort of depend from the Department of Commerce. This is the Department of Education, and this is the Department of Homeland Security. This is another slide showing basically the same thing, that some of the agencies will support both SBIRs and STTRs, so you gotta be careful going in, and we're gonna talk about the differences between an SBIR and STTR. And another thing that's gonna become later is that some of the agencies have very broad topics. So you can apply for an SBIR to basically do whatever you want, like NIH, and that's what you guys are used to. NSF, you can basically propose. I mean, they have topics that are very broad, and we're going to talk about NSF towards the end of today. And USDA, which is the Department of Agriculture. However, most of the other agencies have very targeted topics, okay? And that means that when they put out a solicitation, instead of saying, you know, you can do whatever you want, you have a drug that you want to do for cancer, you know, you specify what you want to do. What they do is they say, for instance, the Department of Defense will say, okay, we need a specific, yellow drone that has to land in a very small area in the desert of Africa. So you need to be able to write a proposal that specifies how you're going to build that yellow drone that can land in a very specific area in the desert of Africa. Okay? So all of those agencies will put up solicitations with very specific topics that you need to be able to answer and deliver the product that they're looking for. Okay? So that is why they are a little bit different than NSF, NIH, or the USDA. Okay. Another important thing to keep in mind is that not all of the agencies have the same budgets to allocate to the SBIR, STTR program, okay? And the differences can be huge, okay? So if you can take a look at this table, and this is sort of the allocation of the SBIR, STTR budget for 2018. So as you can see, the Department of Defense is the agency that has overall the largest SBIR, STTR budget. Okay? And that is followed by NIH, then the Department of Energy, then NSF, and then you can read the rest of the list. Now, why is this important? Because sometimes, you might be convinced that you're developing something that to you, it's so obvious that the only target, let's say, is, might be, in your case, most of you do things that are very biomedical. But sometimes, I'm at workshops, and that might be applicable to you. I don't know exactly what all of you are doing. But you may have something that you're saying, oh, this is clearly something that I am going to target the and you look at this, and the USDA only has $21 million a year for SBIR, right? So it is worth for you to take a look at other solicitations in other agencies to see if they have an interest in your product as well. Because you would be surprised, because some of the agencies may have solicitations that may be applicable to your technology. Because then if you can send it to some of the other agencies that have more money, then you may have a chance, a better chance of getting your project funded, because all of these other agencies have much more money. Let alone if you think that the only one that may want your product is the EPA, because they only have $5 million a year, which is very, very small. Yes. We're gonna do a quick game. As I was saying, the agency's interests can be very surprising. So we're going to try to match the these are funded SBIR projects to the correct granting agency. So if you cannot read this is the Department of Energy with a little bald eagle, I think. This is the USDA. This is the EPA with a little flower. And this is the Department of Defense with a larger eagle. And these are the 4 projects that have been funded by one of these agencies. A ground station for airborne wind energy system, an occupancy profile for energy reduction, an osmosis system for treatment of fracking water, and a cookstove heating and electricity generation for small homes, integrated cooking, heating, and electric power generation. So who do you think, which agency do you think that funded this first project, the developing a ground station for airborne wind energy system? USDA?
Defense.
Someone here said defense, but a lot of you say USDA. It was a USDA. She thought it was defense.
I thought the other one was
You're good. Okay, who do you think funded the second one, the occupancy profiles for energy reduction. I heard DOE, energy, who else? EPA. Okay, it was funded by the Department of Defense. No one guessed that. Now I'm getting interest from someone. Okay, you have 2 left, so now it's 50-50. So who do you think funded this one, the osmosis one? EPA. Okay, it was funded by Department of Energy. You guys. And of course the last one, it was funded by the EPA. So again, it can be surprising. Okay? So the take-home message here is that even though you might think that there's one agency only that may have interest in funding your project, it is worthwhile for you to go to the websites that we're going to show you in a few minutes, where you can look for solicitations and try to see if there are open and available solicitations from different agencies that may align with your technology, because then you can maximize the chances of getting your project funded. Because again, you would be surprised, okay, at what sometimes agencies are willing to fund. The SBIR CTR program as a whole has 3 sort of phases. Phase 1 is where you develop your concepts, you do the first type of work. It's usually between 6 months and a year. You know, budgets vary depending on agency, but it's usually, you know, over $150,000. Phase 2 is where you further develop your prototype, and it's usually around 2 years. Again, budgets may vary, but it's usually over $1 million. And then there's always a third phase, which is where you commercialize your product. Importantly, this is not funded by the SBIR program. However, this is very important because you need to show in all your applications that you're thinking about this phase and that you're working towards commercialization of a product, okay? Because SBIRs and STTRs are product driven, okay? You're working towards a product. And this is very different from an academic grant, where we're testing hypotheses and looking for mechanisms, and it's all basic science. SBIRs and STTRs are always looking for a product, okay? So, kind of the general logistics. What is the qualification of a small business? It needs to be a for-profit business when we're talking about a small business. It needs to have, 500 or fewer employees. The business, greater than 50% needs to be US owned by 1 or more individuals, other business concerns, or a combination of these. And for SBIRs, now they allow you to be greater than 50% owned by multiple venture capital companies, hedge funds, private equity, or a combination of these, although no single one can own more than 50%. As I said before, usually phase 1s are between 6 and 12 months. Phase 2s are up to 2 years. Some of the agencies allow for fast tracks, which combine phase 1 and phase 2s into a single application. And then some of the agencies also allow direct to phase 2, in which you can skip the phase 1 and directly apply for direct to phase 2. Now, as I said before, there are some differences between the SBIR and the STTR. The SBIR does not require the participation of a non-profit research partner, usually a university. Now, 2/3 of the budget need to be directed to the company for the phase 1, and half of the budget for the phase 2. The principal investigator must have their primary employment with the small business, with the company. The difference with the STTR is that requires a collaboration with a nonprofit research partner. That can be a university, it can be a nonprofit research institute. In that case, at least 40% of the budget must be directed to the company, and at least 30% must be for the partnering research institution. And then the other 30% can be directed toward either of them or to a third party. And the PI, the principal investigator, can be employed either with a small business or with a university. So that's sometimes an advantage if there's no one at the company who can really serve as a PI, because then you can have someone at the university or the partnering research institution that can serve as a PI of the grant. A lot of companies that spin out from universities, they really want to keep it separate. Because a lot of universities have very weird and constrictive policies about what can or cannot be done, okay? So it also depends a lot on where the intellectual property is, okay? So if, sort of the intellectual property for the product originally came from the university, that those are arrangements that need to happen somehow. So they might, still want to have an STTR and still have a lot of work being done at the university. Some companies, the actual, let's say, PI or owner, even though he or she is an employee of the university, did a lot of the work outside of the university. So he or she does not want to be related to the university, so they want to have everything at SBIR, because they don't want the university to own anything in terms of intellectual property. So I've had a lot of those cases, and they want to keep it separate. So it really depends a lot on sort of a lot of details. But a lot of people do not have space or resources to do the research. So one possibility is that they still use their university to do a lot of the work, in which case they might have to do an STTR. However, a lot of people just find incubator space or other kind of space to do the work. Now, a lot of universities do not allow PIs to have time to do other stuff that's not university stuff. So they have to be arrangements. Either they need to go on leave or take whatever, so they can be PIs on SBIR grants. So there are a lot of things going on with spin-outs. And that's a very university dependent on how they manage sort of company spin-outs. Some of them are really nice and really encourage people to do it. Some of them are really restrictive on how they manage those cases. So that's a conversation that needs to happen with the tech transfer office.
Spinning a lab out of a university, and that professor is not going to leave the university to run that company, and he wants to be the PI on the grant, it has to be an STTR.
Okay, but they're still allowed in the matter to have some form of stake.
Yeah, that doesn't matter on the grant.
I don't think so. No.
Are they able to have that title with the company, like CMO?
Yeah, that should be fine. The only place where like the NIH is paying attention to like in terms of like your employment is for the PI. And so if the PI on an SBIR, it just has to be, he or she has to be over 50% employed by the company at the time of award.
Right. So the final thing is, it sounds like the restrictions they have on an SBIR regarding the company, like 50% ownership and that type of thing, that still applies to the partnering company with an STTR. Yeah.
The partnering company.
So an SBIR is saying here, like the company, no single person can have more than 50%.
That's the applicant company. So there's one applicant company that's applying for the award. Okay. And they're partnering with the research institute. So none of that stuff applies to the research institute, just the applicant company.
Okay.
So a couple of follow-up questions
Yes.
to the STTR versus SBIR. Is it the same study section at NIH or at any other agents that review both types?
Yes.
Answer is yes.
Yes.
Is it the same limits of money in phase 1 and phase 2 in
Yes.
the two organizations?
Yes.
So what I heard was that there is a favor for STTR if the PI or the company really needs to do academic-based research.
Yeah, so the one thing is on an SBIR, you can still have a research partner in the
Yes.
university.
The main difference is how much, it really depends. I would say that usually the rationale for the small business of whether to select an SBIR versus an STTR is how much of the research that they need to be done needs to be done at an academic institution, right? Because if a lot of phase 1 involves, animal work or work that really needs to be done in a lab with a lot of resources that are easier to find in an academic background, and because you can have an academic partner in an SBIR. However, that is restricted to only 30% of your budget. So if you need to allocate more than 30% of your budget, to that academic partner, then you're kind of stuck with an STTR. Another reason, as Erin said, is that maybe the company does not have a person who has enough background to serve as a PI. Maybe they are all business people, they are all MBAs, maybe they don't have enough experience as PIs or as project managers. So they really need to rely on that academic PI to serve as a PI. So, and the only way they can do that is through an STTR, because the SBIR mechanism doesn't allow your academic partner, sub-award PI, to be the PI of the grant. That is something that we sometimes see, is that they could get away with allocating 30% of the budget to the academic partner. However, they need that sub-award PI to be the PI of the grant, to bring his or her expertise as a PI and as an expert on breast cancer to the table. So they need to choose the STTR mechanism so they can put him as the PI of the grant. Those are the two reasons why someone would choose an STTR basically over an SBIR. You wanted to have a question a long time ago.
Follow up? Is there another aspect that we should consider? If, for example, in the life of a company, you have a need to develop more resources to product design. We haven't quite yet got to a stage where we have defined the product and need to do more basic research before we move forward. Is the STTR more appropriate for that, or is there no difference between the two funding mechanisms?
There's no difference. There's no difference. With that in mind, if you need to do more basic research, you always have to think yourself, is the SBIR STTR mechanism the appropriate mechanism for me? And we will go over that question in a little bit. Your question.
Actually, I have two questions. I'll try to be fast.
It's okay.
So can the research plan in the two mechanisms overlap?
The research plan is going to be the same.
Okay.
The mechanism doesn't matter.
Can two grants, for instance, an SBIR and STTR mechanism with the same research plan, can they be submitted together? So what is really the difference between owner and PI? So in other words, can one be a full academic, in a full-time academic faculty own an SBIR and then have someone else run the
Yeah, the owner of the company is
Has
just
nothing
the
to
owner
do
of the
with the
company.
PI,
Yeah,
right.
that doesn't, your selection of the PI, of a principal investigator of a grant, that is very independent of who runs the company. That is very independent. Your selection of the PI has to do with who is the best person who can be in charge of this grant, who has the expertise to be the PI of this grant. Now, sometimes that person can be found in the company. It can be the CEO, it can be the CSO, it can be the CMO. It has to be a person that has experience in the field, that hopefully that, has had grants before. And that is what I said before. Sometimes the company, because these are all mostly small companies, 2 or 3 people, or even 1 person, sometimes that person cannot be found within the company. And that is why a lot of companies need to necessarily do an STTR, because they need to have that PI be the sub-award PI in an STTR.
How much stake a PI can have that company where he can still file for the STTR?
I don't think there's a limit.
So a PI in an academic institute could be 100% owner of a company and still file for an STTR for that company.
Yes. Now, if that person's going to hang on to their faculty position, so they're still going to be 100% employed by
The university.
then presumably at some point in time, they're either going to leave and run the company, or someone else is going to run the company
Right.
on their behalf, right? But in terms of, there's no rule around, like, if they've spun out a company and they own the company, but they're going to keep that faculty position, and then eventually someone else is going to take over, then that's fine. The decision point is really around, for an SBIR, that person has to be over 50% employed by the company, which means that person cannot be a faculty member at the time the SBIR award is conferred.
Right.
Well, I mean, the thing is that you're going to have to report your time to the NIH. So at the
Right.
time that award is conferred, who is that person working for? If they're working as a full-time faculty member, the NIH is going to be like, well, you're not over 50% employed at the company. 'cause you have this
Ownership
faculty
and
position.
employment are different things, okay?
It's about time. It's not an ownership question. It's about
right.
where are you spending the majority of your time working for? Is it the university or is it the company?
So, is it worth the effort applying for SBIR as an STTR, as a company? Well, statistically, only 20% of companies survive the first 5 years. That's the overall success rate for all sort of startup companies. However, we have, from our own data, of the EGC's clients, 500 grant-funded clients that we've had over the past 5 years, 99% are still in business or have had successful exits. So those to us are pretty striking numbers. Does that mean that they're going to have a product at the end? No. What it means is that, having funded grants can still buy you time, right? At least you have a running company after 5 years. And that, allows you time to really see if your product will be worth it. We have and I'm going to go over them really quickly, given all these questions. We have a couple of examples. Agile Science was a small biotech company that was funded by Eva Garland, our CEO. It was a small biotech company that were developing antibiotic agents. And also there's the iRobot example. So Agile Sciences was a company founded by Eva and other 2 co-founders. It was a spin-out from NC State, North Carolina State University, in 2007. They first raised $1 million out of a Series A in 2007. But what happened next? The stock market crashed in 2008, so all their dreams crashed with it. So Eva said, maybe we can get grants. She had never written a grant before. So she sat down and Googled, how do I write a grant? Where do I get grants? And that's how she basically started what she has right now. And in basically 9 years, they managed to raise $12 million of non-dilutive funding, providing the vast majority of the capital required to advance their product development. And how does it look like? So the first thing that they got was a $50,000 loan from the North Carolina Biotech Center. And this is a sort of a resource that we have in North Carolina. It's a biotechnology center that provides grants, but also loans for small businesses in North Carolina. So that money, basically, they invested in writing SBIR and STTR grant proposals. They also got a match from that program, NC1, that's run by our local state government. Although it has been discontinued ever since. With that, out of those 5 SBIRs that she wrote, they got one funded, and then a phase 1. At that time, it was only $150,000, and then an extra $50,000. And then once they got one grant out of the door, it became very easier for them to get more grants. So they had NIH SBIRs, STTRs. They got an NIH contract for $3 million, and they also got foundation funding from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and from the Bay Area Lyme Fund grants. For a total of $12 million. So another interesting case is the Roomba, the iRobot. So you will be surprised to know that it wasn't all private funding. So iRobot, or the Roomba people, they got $10.2 million in SBIR CCR funding through the Department of Defense. Now, they didn't fund directly the vacuum cleaner, right? So what they did fund was sort of the core technology was the unmanned vehicles, the robot-human interfaces that they were doing for the Army. But that core technology allowed them to, as a side project, develop the Roomba that we know today.
The next part we're going to talk about is the strategies that you can use to match your technology to appropriate grant opportunities, with the idea that you can increase your chances of success by targeting multiple grant opportunities at one time. So how do you begin to identify what those multiple shots on goal might be for your particular proposal? So the first thing that you're going to want to do is figure out from where your technology is right now, what is the specific maturity level that you're at. And so this becomes important because to be competitive for SBIR, STTR, you need to be at a very specific technology readiness level. Okay, so the SBIR, STTR has a sweet spot where you want to be between, 3 to 6-ish. So essentially what you want to keep in mind here is that this is not at a basic research stage or discovery research stage of readiness. And we're going to illustrate this with some case studies, but essentially the technology must be beyond concept stage. Have already passed some early stage R&D milestones. At this point, you're not looking for your target or still sort of developing an idea of what the design of your prototype is going to be. You need to have passed some early feasibility, some early proof of concept milestones. So for instance, if you're looking at a phase 1 SBIR, STTR, you're sort of at the stage where you need to do research to really prove your concept. You also should consider that for the SBIR STT program, even at a phase 1 level, preliminary data is essentially mandatory. And this isn't explicitly stated in the FOAs, and the solicitations it may say that it's not required. But the reason that we say that is that the program is so competitive, and you just have to assume that all of your competitors are going to go in with data. So really, to be competitive enough to get into that top percentage, you have to have it. It's not really optional. So this preliminary data should provide support for the feasibility of your technology, and it should also be robust and generated from well-designed experiments. So the NIH in particular has recently given additional guidance to reviewers that they really want them to look carefully at the rigor of that preliminary research. So you don't want to put a one-off experiment in there. You want studies that have been well designed, they're reproducible, they're supported by multiple sample sizes, which are explicitly stated in the grant, and also statistical tests. If those are missing, your reviewers are pretty likely to ding you in the approach section of your review, because they're looking for that preliminary data to be rigorous. Okay, so if you're evaluating your maturity level and your technology is still more of a concept and you're thinking, what I want to do is write an SBIR to fund that very early research to just do discovery research to see if like this could be a product, you're probably a little bit too early for SBIR. You probably need to generate some of that preliminary data first so you have really solid studies to go into your phase 1 SBIR with. Okay, so I put in a case study here to help illustrate the idea of how do you know when you're actually ready to go in for a phase 1 SBIR? So in this case study, a company has an idea for a new drug product to treat small cell lung cancer, which currently is in need of new targeted therapies. They have a molecular target in mind based on published studies and a library of compounds to screen against the target. They haven't yet verified inhibiting the molecular target will have the intended effects to treat the disease. Is this company a good fit for the SBIR program? So where do you think their TRL is? Like just based on this little thermometer here.
2.
Oops, there we go. Yeah, so they're probably down here, right? They're still doing basic discovery research. So if you're still screening for a lead compound, then you're probably not quite ready to go into that program. Okay, so they're probably down here somewhere. So they're a little bit early. Okay, so similarly, a company has a new drug product to treat small cell lung cancer. They have screened a library of compounds, identified 3 high priority leads that all show potent inhibition of the molecular target in cancer cell lines and reduction of tumor burden in a small cell lung cancer xenograft model. So where do you think they are?
Maybe 5.
Yeah, so they might actually be a little bit beyond 3 or 4. But in general, they're still going to be in this sweet spot where they're going to be competitive. And I will say, this kind of an application is going to probably go to the NCI, right? And the NCI is a really, really competitive institute. And so the more data you have going into that initial phase 1 SBIR, the better your chances are going to be. Another tip is, if you're evaluating your technology and you're trying to figure out, like, where am I a good fit for? Like, should I go in for a phase 1 or might I be competitive for a fast track or even a phase 2? This is a good place to utilize your program officers for advice. So reach out to the program officers for input, and they, once you tell them a little bit about where you are, they may also be able to direct you to where they think you're probably going to be the best fit in terms of phases. Yeah, so the question was, if you're in sort of like the biologics field, do you need animal data to go into a phase 1? So the answer is, it's difficult to say exactly. So for most institutes, they will say that for your phase 1 SBIR program, they want to see that you've demonstrated in vivo efficacy by the end of phase 1. So if you haven't yet shown fully comprehensive in vivo efficacy going into your phase 1, that's expected. You definitely need to have shown some in vivo efficacy, some in vivo target engagement, in vitro target engagement and efficacy. If you have some early xenograft data that's maybe just in an animal model for cancer therapeutics, it probably positions you a little bit better, but I would say it's not necessary. I would say if you have good in vitro efficacy data and good target engagement data, then I think that you're still in a solid place to go in for a phase 1. Yeah. And then most institutes, as I said, are going to want to see that you propose those in vivo experiments in your phase 1. So the question is a fast track essentially like a mechanism that's always available? And so the answer is it depends. So not every institute offers the fast track and the direct to phase 2. So depending on what your technology area is, if you look in the omnibus SBIR solicitation, it'll say what participating institutes offer a fast track and a phase 2, direct to phase 2. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to get into how do you actually go about searching for opportunities. So what we've included here are a number of resources that you can use to sort of just search the web for open solicitations. The one that we favor and that we recommend to people the most is grants.gov, and that's because it's the best search engine for collating solicitations across agency. So it's the most user-friendly, it's the most comprehensive. You can also find contract solicitations using fedbizops.gov. Contracts are quite different from grants in that they're very, very specific in terms of their scope of work. So you're actually basically contracting with the government to do a very specific scope of work so that you're developing a product that the government really wants and wants to use. So it's a little bit different than a grant, but sometimes you can find something that's a good match. This is true sometimes if you have technology that might appeal to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense has a lot of contracts. But as Vicki said, it has to really align well with the mission of that particular contract. If you go to our website, we also include links to SBIR, STTR solicitations for different agencies. The SBIR.gov website will also have those same solicitations. NIH, SBIR, STTR solicitations have links, and they'll also include all of their targeted SBIR, STTRs in there. So there's the omnibus, right? There's the omnibus SBIR, STTR, which Vicki said, you can basically propose anything. And then they have like targeted solicitations that the institutes will put out because they're really trying to get applications to address like a very specific mission. So you can also look at those to see if there's anything there that matches. And then NSF has their own website, and then the Department of Defense has their own website. So, and just to reiterate, the DoD doesn't have omnibus solicitations, so you can go through them, but they're going to be very focused, topic focused. Okay, so for grants.gov, I actually wanted to pull this up on the web. It's a little bit easier. Okay, so does somebody just want to throw out so basically with grants.gov, the easiest way to do it is to just do some keyword searching. And you can try different keywords to make sure you're not missing things, but does somebody just want to throw out like a general topic area? Does anybody have like a specific disease area they might be targeting with the technology, or a specific...
Reproductive science.
Okay, so let's just say... Oops. That's broad. But that's good because I'm going to... Yeah, okay. So it's actually like that's not that broad. Like we got 57 results, which isn't a ton. Yeah. So what you can see is that it collates all of these here, and you can see over here that it tells you the agency that these come from. So this is HHS, NIH, USAID. I don't know. That's USAID. So mostly these are going to be, yeah. Yep. So here's a DoD one down here. It collates all of these. One thing to keep in mind is that, of course, this isn't going to include your omnibus announcements because we're keyword searching, so that's not going to come up in just apparent announcements. These are going to be all sort of like your targeted grants. So what I wanted to show you is, let's just say, let's just go a little bit broader and say, like, what if we were to just say something as broad as cancer, which is 185 open grants right now. Okay, this is a little bit more. If you're developing a technology like a cancer therapeutic, you're probably going to have a bit more of a targeted patient population than every person that has cancer for your therapeutic initially. So you can also go through and filter your results. So right now it's showing you everything that's forecasted and posted. So you usually want to stay there. You can also sort by whether you want to just look at grants, contracts, cooperative agreements. I usually just leave those. You can. Where it's useful to filter is by eligibility. So if you're a small business and you know that you need to apply for a grant that's eligible for small businesses, because obviously a lot of grants are only going to want to go to nonprofits, you can come down here and filter it for small businesses. And now you only have 25 results to go through. So that's basically, in a nutshell, like what you can do there. But that's probably the best place to identify sort of everything that's available and open. This again are just your agency-specific sites. If you kind of have an idea that you're not going to be applying within the NIH, you can look specifically within the NSF. Obviously, the NSF doesn't accept any basic like drug development types of applications. So if that's what you're doing, you're going to be in the NIH. Okay, the other area that you might look into are private foundations. So there's a couple of just points we wanted to make about that, and that you can identify foundations that might be interested using, again, sort of general keyword searching. But keep a couple of things in mind. One is that private foundations almost exclusively fund academics or nonprofits. They typically don't like to fund for-profit small businesses. So sometimes you can get access to that funding a little bit easier if you're in partnership with a nonprofit. But one thing to keep in mind is that even though on most of these they're posted RFAs, they'll explicitly say, like, these are only going to go to nonprofits. Those are the only people that are eligible. They have, because they're not a federal agency, they have the power to fund businesses if it aligns with their mission. So what you can, and they do sometimes fund businesses if they really want to promote that particular technology. And so in that case, what you can do is to just do some relationship building, reach out to that foundation directly, start some conversations, introduce your technology to see if it aligns with their particular mission. The other thing to keep in mind is that awards from foundations are usually smaller than federal grants. They have a smaller pool of money. Their awards typically start out at like $50,000 to $100,000. The upside is that they can give it to you very quickly. It doesn't have to go through this like lengthy process that it has to go through with the bigger foundations. Again, good to establish a relationship to get access to those funds. Yeah, I don't think I've left anything out there. Okay. So once you've sort of collated a list of possibilities for your technology, you next want to go and read each of those solicitations in depth in order to determine whether they align with your technology aligns with the purpose of the opportunity. The other thing you want to get a good idea about is, again, the solicitation will typically tell you what technology readiness they expect you to be. In many cases, solicitations will explicitly say, we require you to have preliminary data, or we don't require you to have preliminary data, so it's good to take note of that. Ensure that you're eligible for that particular mechanism, and then make sure you understand the budget restrictions. And then, of course, the deadline for when it's due. So if you for the grants.gov search that we just did, if you were to just click on one of those solicitations, it brings up the entire funding opportunity announcement. So you can find all of that information here. Section 1, where it says funding opportunity description, that you want to read that part really carefully, especially for targeted solicitations, because that's where it's going to tell you this is exactly the mission of this opportunity. These are the types of projects that we're looking for. This is what we require you to have sort of like done or accomplished up to this point. So that's going to be the main place where you're going to figure out, like, am I a good fit, or what do I need to show in my application to make sure I'm competitive for this? And for targeted solicitations, it's always a good idea to reach out to the program officer affiliated with that solicitation and just make sure that you're a good fit for them. So you don't waste a bunch of time putting in an application and then basically they say, like, this isn't within the scope of what we want to fund. But the program officer, once you introduce what you're going to do, can give you a good idea of whether or not it's a good fit for the program. So if you just scroll down, you can find information about the budget. This will tell you sort of the budget caps for the grant, and it'll also give you information about whether that funding is meant to be used for direct costs or if it's an overall budget for the entire grant, including indirects. Okay. All right, so then once you've narrowed your list down to sort of the best fit of the grants that you want to apply for, then you're at a place where you can develop a strategy for how you're going to prepare and then submit those grant applications. So the idea here is to try to get multiple shots on goal for any particular project, just to increase your chances of getting that funding. And then you always want to prioritize, your preparation time and also the particular mechanism for your highest priority projects, because you may have a platform technology that you can diversify into like different indications. And then that will increase perhaps your chances of getting funding for that project, but you want it to align with your business strategy, so you want to prioritize maybe what your initial indication or your initial market is first. Okay, so this is just an example of what we help our companies put together. And essentially, you know, what we help them do is do the searches, as I said, prioritize sort of the mechanisms that fit the technology readiness that they're at, as well as goals that they have for that particular product. And then, you know, when you set this up, you want to make sure that you keep in mind how long it takes to prepare a grant. Make sure you allow time for completing your registration, preparing the grant, and then have a very clear idea of when those grants are due. You also want to have in mind how long it takes for that grant to complete scientific merit review. Council review is after it's completed peer review and the institute or the agency decides, like, are we going to fund this or not, based on their internal pay lines. Okay, so then you just kind of stack on top of each other, like, all of the different mechanisms that you think might be a good fit, and develop a timeline for how you're going to submit, prepare and submit those applications. And keep in mind that, like, these may not all be radically different proposals, right? Like, you might have one proposal that you prepare that you then alter slightly to fit different mechanisms. The idea is that if you have, you know, if you're submitting essentially the same application to multiple agencies, that's fine. There are no rules that prohibit you from doing that. You just can't receive funding from two separate agencies for the exact same set of studies. Oops, I think I went the wrong way. Okay, so these are just the keys, just to reiterate, to multiple shots on goal. So familiarize yourself with funding opportunities at multiple agencies. For the NIH, and we'll actually go into this a little bit more later this afternoon, but for the NIH, you can also request different study sections for each proposal. So say you have a platform technology that might help a patient population in the cardiovascular field, and then you also might be able to use that platform technology to help a completely different patient population. Those might be two study sections. What's important about that is that that means those proposals are not going to be reviewed by the same panel, and they could potentially be funded simultaneously because it would not hopefully be the same set of studies. So in order for you to receive funding for both of those applications simultaneously, the studies could be similar, but they must be different. So you basically can't get funding to fund the same exact set of studies twice. So where we see this the most often is if people have like a drug or something that can be used to treat two different diseases. Maybe the development work that's needed to advance the drug towards those different patient populations is different enough that you would need two different pools of money to fund those studies in parallel. In that case, you could get both of those grants funded at once. Okay, the question is, if you have a drug and you're going to use that drug in two applications, but you need to have it manufactured, would you have money from both grants for that or just from one? So you couldn't pull down money from the NIH twice if it was going to be drug that you're going to use for two studies. So basically what I'm saying is, like, if you say I need $30,000 to manufacture a drug for studies A and B, okay, let me back up. This is what I would recommend that you do in that case. If you know how much drug you're going to need for this study and you know how much drug you're going to need for this study, I would keep it separate. So if you know you need total $40,000 for enough drug to fund both of those studies, just divide it up so that it's clean.
Yes, I would recommend the same thing.
Yeah. Because otherwise it gets confusing. You're going to run into problems with the NIH in terms of them trying to, like, review your budget.
Yeah, at least at the time of submission. What happens after you have the award, there might be ways to get around, practically speaking, you know, how to, you know, work around that and how to use the vendors, and, you know, you can work with your grant compliance people to work around that. But at the time of submission, you would, in proposal number one, you know, ask however much money you need to ask for manufacturing 12 proposal. Pounds of your drug, and in the other one to manufacture 12 pounds of your drug to make this, and just keep it separate, keep it clean.
Yeah, the idea is that in the budget for that particular grant is only supposed to contain things that are furthering those specific research objectives. So as much as you can, I would just keep it separate. Know the rules for multiple submissions. For the NSF only allows one per cycle, so you can't actually stack a bunch of applications together for the NSF. You can do that with the NIH. Again, we recommend that if you do that, you try to target different study sections, because if you try to, you know, send multiple applications in, but they're all within the same sort of topic area, they're going to get reviewed by the same people. There's no rule that's disallowed, but we typically assume that there's probably some bias in that study section if they keep seeing the application, an application from the same company multiple times and it's only like slightly altered. So we recommend that people try to avoid that. And then again, the rule is that you can have multiple applications proposing essentially the same set of studies. If that's the case, then you can only accept funding from one particular institute for that. Okay, so I think I've gone over that. So a couple of case studies to illustrate this a little bit better. So if you have a technology where you have a small molecule, in this case, with activity against several bacterial pathogens, the idea is that you might be able to submit applications to multiple agencies and also target multiple indications. So let's just say in your first round, you're able to put together 3 NIH phase 1 SBIRs simply because you're able to develop applications where you're using the same small molecule, but you're targeting different indications, and that allow you to target that application to 3 different study sections. There's a potential you could get all 3 of those funded simultaneously. The idea is that those would be parallel paths of development. You could then take those applications and then modify them to fit some of these other agencies. Again, keeping in mind that if it's the exact same set of studies that you're proposing here, you can propose it to the DoD, but you can't accept funding for that idea or that set of studies twice. And then always keep in mind that your success rate goes up quite a bit on resubmission. So, you know, if you get your summary statement back and you're able to address some of those criticisms, then your chances of success on that second round are going to be higher. So in the case where you have a technology that's not maybe amenable to having lots of different applications, in this case, a novel chemistry to provide crop protection against fungal pathogens. So the NIH is not going to fund this. So you're pretty limited to the NSF, the USDA, maybe some private foundation funding. So in that case, it's going to be really important, since you have less shots on goal, that those applications be really good. So allow yourself more time for preparation, and then definitely go in for resubmissions on all of those. Okay, so we're going to take a break from us talking, and we're going to break for a small activity. So in the front cover of the binder that we gave you, there are a bunch of documents for all of the activities. So this one is prioritizing grant opportunities. So I think actually, since everybody's at the table, everybody can just stay at the table that they're at. And then for this one, we provided a list of NIH grant opportunities. Just to simplify this activity, we only included NIH opportunities. The idea is I'm going to give you a prompt of just a company technology. Identify the best matches of the tech to the opportunity by rank ordering the opportunities in order of best to worst matches, and then prioritize the top 3 for the first round of applications. And so the idea is that there's probably different ways you could go about doing this. So there's probably no exact correct answer. But the idea is to get you thinking about how you could potentially alter applications to fit different mechanisms. And then to also still be considering, like, what's my top priority project here? So, oops. Oh, that was right. Okay, so the company is called BioGuard. This is a startup company broadly focused on the development of wearable biosensors that provide automatic physiological measurements from a single wearable device. They are currently seeking non-dilutive funding to support early stage R&D of a new device that has internal electronics as well as liquid delivery components for rapid response drug delivery or repeat dosing. They would like to apply these concepts to multiple indications. So what I've provided you is both a list of sort of targeted NIH opportunities, and I also included a abbreviated list of NIH study sections, or sorry, SBIR, STTR study sections. So you can kind of consider a combinatorial approach of looking for targeted solicitations and also what you would do in terms of using the SBIR, STTR program. So let's just take about 15 minutes. You can read through those opportunities, and then we'll do a recap. I haven't given you enough information to know, like, for instance, what this company's first priority would be in terms of target indication. So the answer to that could be many things, right? Yeah, so one thing you might notice is that with the targeted solicitations, like, they might not be a perfect fit, right? They're really specific, they're missions of the institutes, and so they might not always be a really perfect match with what you're trying to do. The idea is that, you know, there might be ways in which you could modify your proposal a little bit to fit that solicitation while still keeping it within the scope of the mission of the company. And then, of course, you know, with your SBIR, STTR program, another option would be to submit multiple applications here and targeting different study sections, right? Anybody else have any other input here? So if you were to take this technology and look for opportunities outside the NIH, what would be some other potential agencies you think might be interested in this technology? Definitely DoD. So if this company came to us, we would definitely look at Department of Defense.